Welcome to the place where truth isn't sugar-coated and growth isn't optional. Here, comfort zones are destroyed, excuses are buried, and the raw, unfiltered reality of life is laid bare. We speak to the warrior in you, the part that refuses to settle, that hungers for more, that knows discipline is the real currency of success. You'll hear truths that sting, but also heal. You'll learn why failure is never the end, why your identity is your destiny, and why action without belief is just noise. This is where victims become creators, where faith is sharpened by fire, and where your story is rewritten by choice, not chance. If you're ready to rise, to fight for the life you were born to live, and to never again mistake comfort for safety, you're in the right place. The sound of his voice in the dark carried a tone never heard before, soft, urgent, and laced with something dangerous. It was the kind of tone that didn't belong to ordinary conversations, the kind of tone people reserve for words they aren't supposed to be saying. It wrapped itself around each syllable like silk over a blade, smooth, enticing, yet capable of cutting deep. Every word felt stolen from somewhere private, somewhere forbidden, spilling into the quiet night air, as if secrecy itself had loosened its grip. It was strange how a voice could change when no one was supposed to hear it. At home, his words were often hurried or distracted, the clipped exchanges of a man with a schedule too full and a heart half present. But here, in the shadows, his tone flowed slow, deliberate, like he was savoring the taste of every sentence before letting it slip past his lips. There was a gentleness to it, but also a weight, a hidden edge, as though beneath the softness lurked something dangerous, something meant to be concealed. The cadence was hypnotic, drawing the ear closer even as the mind screamed to step back. It wasn't just what he was saying, it was the way he was saying it. There was warmth there, a deep warmth, the kind usually reserved for the kind of moments that change people forever. It was the warmth of intimacy, of belonging, of a connection that should have been impossible. A murmur followed, softer still, almost too quiet to catch, but the few words that drifted through were enough to twist the stomach into knots. Compliments wrapped in whispers, promises not made at home, words that felt stolen from the life that was supposed to exist between two people who had built years together. They rolled off his tongue as if they belonged to someone else entirely, a man living a different story, one not bound by the truth, spoken under a shared roof. The air around seemed to grow heavier, each breath drawn tighter than the last. Streetlights spilled weak amber light across the ground, their glow failing to chase away the shadows where he stood. And still, his voice carried a strange, intoxicating blend of affection and secrecy, the kind of mixture that burns hotter than the most open declarations. The mind tried to make sense of it, to craft an explanation that didn't taste of betrayal. Maybe it was business, maybe it was an old friend, maybe it was nothing, but the tone shattered every excuse. People don't speak like that to those who mean nothing. They don't pause between words like they're memorizing the way another's silence feels. They don't let their voices lower to that soft, almost trembling register unless the stakes are deeply, dangerously personal. The night held its breath. Every sound in the distance faded into insignificance. It was as if the world itself had pulled up a chair to listen, to witness this secret spilling into the open air. The hum of traffic seemed far away, the rustle of leaves barely there, and yet that voice, low, steady, and charged with something unspoken, was impossible to ignore. There's an ache that comes when the truth starts to rise from its hiding place. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, curling into the edges of the mind like smoke, and once it's there, once that smoke begins to fill the lungs, it's impossible to breathe the same way again. The voice carried that ache now, a trace of something irreversible. Then came the laughter, soft, short, but filled with a familiarity that didn't belong here. It wasn't the laughter of politeness, the one reserved for strangers or colleagues. No, it was richer than that. It had history in it, shared moments, a private language, and it wasn't shared at home anymore. The more the voice wrapped itself in that dangerous tenderness, the clearer the truth became. There was no undoing this moment, no unhearing what had been heard. Whatever the words meant exactly, they belonged to someone else now. And once a voice changes like that for another, it never truly changes back. In that fragile silence between sentences, the heart began to harden, not out of choice, but out of necessity, because there are moments when the truth doesn't ask permission to be known. It simply arrives, uninvited, and takes its seat at the table. And once it's there, it never leaves. Some truths don't just break trust. They change the shape of the soul forever. Footsteps trailed quietly, each one heavier than the last, pressing into the ground as though carrying the full weight of every unanswered question. The night air clung to the skin, cool yet suffocating, as though the darkness itself knew where this path would lead. Each step was deliberate, slow enough to remain unheard, yet steady enough to close the distance to the truth. The street stretched ahead in a long, narrow ribbon of dim light and deep shadow. Every movement felt amplified, every shift of gravel underfoot a reminder that this was dangerous territory, not just the place, but the act itself. Crossing an invisible line between wondering and knowing, between the safety of ignorance and the sharp edge of discovery. Shadows shifted against walls and fences, growing longer, bending into distorted shapes that seemed to reach forward, almost warning against going any further. But suspicion has a way of drowning out reason. It digs its claws into the mind and refuses to let go until it's fed, until it's proven right or wrong. There was a faint hum of traffic somewhere in the distance, but here, in this narrow stretch between streetlights, the world was quiet enough to hear the rhythm of breathing. Not the steady, even breaths of calm, but shallow, measured pulls of air, keeping each inhale soft to avoid drawing attention. Every sound was a threat. Every step had to be hidden within the silence. Ahead, the outline of a figure moved with purpose, familiar in posture, in gait, in the subtle lean of the shoulders. The sight sent a jolt through the chest, not from surprise, but from the cold, steady realization that the suspicion might be justified. The body moves differently when it's not alone, when it's walking towards something, or someone. It doesn't want the rest of the world to see. The pace slowed, blending into the darkness just far enough back to watch without being seen. The soft scuff of shoes ahead, the occasional pause at a corner, the faint sound of keys in a hand. It was a pattern that seemed harmless in isolation, but here, in the context of this night, it dripped with meaning. The ache of suspicion settled deeper with each movement. This was no accident, no late night walk for fresh air, no harmless detour. There was intent in every turn, in every pause, in the way the head tilted slightly as if listening for a signal. Shadows on the walls stretched and bent like silent witnesses, their long arms reaching out across the pavement, trying to hold the truth back a little longer. But truth doesn't wait. It draws closer, step by step, until it's just ahead, wrapped in the sound of footsteps and the scent of the night air. The figure ahead stopped under the weak glow of a single street lamp, light spilling across familiar features, and in that moment the air seemed to freeze. There was no turning back from here. Every muscle tensed, but the steps continued, closing the gap by inches. The world felt reduced to a narrow tunnel of vision, every detail magnified. The curve of a smile that wasn't meant to be seen, the low murmur of words spoken to someone just out of sight, the way the body leaned in with the ease of practiced familiarity. The ache in the chest deepened into something colder, sharper, the kind of pain that doesn't come from one single moment, but from the accumulation of every small sign ignored, every gut feeling dismissed. It was all here now, written in the way he moved, in the way his voice lowered when hers answered. The final steps brought the scene into full view, no shadows left to hide behind, and with that sight came the quiet, certain understanding that everything was about to change. Some truths arrive gently, others crash through the darkness without mercy. This one walked quietly, step by step, until it stood face to face with the one who least wanted to see it. The glow of a streetlight revealed the truth in fragments, as if the night itself wanted to break it gently, though there was nothing gentle about what it held. First, the faint gleam of metal caught the eye. A familiar curve of the hood, the exact shade and shape known too well, parked far from where it should have been. It didn't belong here, not on this street, not at this hour, not in this part of the city where there was no reason to be. The air felt heavier as the distance closed, the hum of the engine faint but present, telling its own story, that it hadn't been sitting there long. The windshield reflected the pale yellow light above, making it hard to see inside at first. But then movement flickered in the glass, small, deliberate. Two figures, close enough that the space between them barely existed. The street lamp cut the scene into pieces, the curve of a shoulder turning in, the faint outline of a hand brushing something, or someone, a face leaning closer. It was all there, revealed in disjointed flashes, the kind of images that the mind desperately tries to rearrange into something innocent. But there was no innocent version of this, not here, not now. Then came the laugh, short, quiet, yet sharp enough to slice through the stillness like a blade. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It carried the ease of intimacy, the kind of laugh that comes when someone knows exactly which words will spark it. It had weight, it had history, it didn't belong to strangers. The sound struck deeper than any shouted confession could. There was no denial strong enough to erase it. That laugh was a language all its own, and in that moment it spoke volumes. It told of nights spent talking in secret, of touches hidden from the world, of trust being given where it never should have been. The streetlight's glow seemed cruel now, spilling its truth across the scene without care for the damage it would do. The figures were clearer with each passing second. One face turned just enough to catch the light, a face that should have been impossible to see here. A face that carried the same bloodline. The ground beneath felt less certain, as though the earth itself had shifted. Betrayal was expected in a way. The mind had been bracing for it since the first signs appeared. But not like this, not tangled with the kind of betrayal that cut twice, that reached beyond vows and into the heart of family. Every instinct screamed to move, to walk away before the rest of the truth spilled out, before it became impossible to forget the way they looked at each other. But feet stayed rooted, as though some invisible force held them in place. Sometimes the need to see is stronger than the need to protect what's left unbroken. The figures leaned closer still, silhouettes almost merging in the dim light. Words were exchanged, too soft to hear, but their meaning was written plainly in the way bodies angled toward one another. It was the language of people who no longer feared being caught, people too lost in the moment to remember the weight of the world outside it. Every second burned, each detail searing itself into memory, the hand resting where it didn't belong, the tilt of a head inviting something more, the quiet between them, thick with understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It was a truth that didn't arrive all at once, but instead carved its way in piece by piece, until there was no room left for doubt. The street lamp hummed above, its light unwavering. The rest of the world seemed impossibly far away, as if this street existed in its own terrible pocket of time. And in that pocket, the truth stood unflinching, unashamed, daring anyone to look away. Some scenes don't need to be imagined or explained. They tell their own story, and once they've been seen, they live in the mind forever. This was one of them. Recognition struck like a storm when the second face turned. the light catching it just enough to erase any room for doubt. The world seemed to contract in that instant, every sound dulling, every movement slowing, as if time itself was holding its breath. It was a face tied by blood, by years of shared history, by the kind of trust that once felt untouchable, a face that had been present in life's most intimate moments, celebrations, losses, secrets whispered in confidence. A face that should never have been here, in this place, in this way. The first instinct was disbelief, the mind clawing for any explanation that could soften the blow. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe the shadows had played a trick, reshaping features into something familiar. But the eyes don't lie, neither do the subtle expressions that only someone who has known a person their entire life would notice. That tilt of the head, the curve of the mouth in a half smile, the way the gaze lingered, locked onto him as though the rest of the world had fallen away. The air grew heavier, each breath harder to take. A memory surfaced, laughter around a dinner table, the warmth of a hand squeezed in comfort, the safety of believing in loyalty without question. All of it felt tainted now, dragged through the mud by the sight unfolding under the streetlight. The figure beside them shifted slightly, his body leaning closer in a way that spoke volumes without words. It wasn't casual, it wasn't innocent. It was the kind of closeness born of countless stolen moments, the kind of ease that only comes when boundaries have long been crossed. And they both looked so at home in it, as if this wasn't a secret rendezvous but simply their place. The storm inside grew louder, colliding with memories and tearing through the fragile remains of trust. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was something deeper, something far more insidious. It was the betrayal of blood, the severing of a bond that had once felt unbreakable. Every shared moment, every act of support, every time the word family had been spoken with pride now felt like a lie. Eyes stayed fixed on them, not out of choice but because looking away felt impossible. It was like staring at the scene of an accident, horrifying but magnetic. The tilt of their heads toward one another, the way his hand brushed against theirs, the quiet comfort they found in each other's presence. It was a language of its own, and it spoke of betrayal in its purest form. There was no confrontation, no sharp gasp to give them away, only silence, the kind of silence that holds every unspoken word, every swallowed scream, every piece of a heart breaking in real time. That silence was the witness now, recording each second in brutal clarity, ensuring it could never be erased. The mind began to wander through the past, replaying every odd glance exchanged between them, every too long hug, every time he'd defended them with a little too much fervor. Each memory was rebranded, rewritten under the harsh truth of what stood before these eyes now. The pattern had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, buried under the comfort of trust. The storm shifted then, moving from disbelief to a cold, razor-sharp clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was something they had chosen, over and over again. Every choice had been a knife, pressed slowly into the back, twisted deeper each time they'd smiled and pretended everything was as it should be. The streetlight flickered slightly, a brief dimming before flaring back to life, as if the night itself couldn't bear to keep this truth hidden any longer. And in that light, the reality stood unflinching. The person once held closest by blood was now the one standing furthest from anything that could be called loyalty. Some betrayals leave scars, others dig graves for the trust that once existed. This one did both. In that instant, love curdled into something sharp. It wasn't a gradual shift, not a slow erosion over time, but a sudden, violent turning of the heart, like sweet milk souring the moment it meets the wrong air. Every promise that had once been clung to for comfort now felt like poison. Every word once cherished rang hollow in memory, echoing with the falseness of a practiced lie. Every tender glance, every shared laugh, every hand held in moments of fear or joy. All of it seemed now like part of an elaborate performance, designed not to protect love, but to conceal the decay beneath. The realization came with a strange kind of clarity, as if a fog had lifted. What had once been seen as affection now looked like distraction, as though every kiss and every whispered reassurance had been placed like a curtain, carefully drawn to hide the darkness on the other side. It became impossible to remember those moments without also seeing the truth that had been growing in the shadows all along. Faces, words, and touches from the past replayed themselves uninvited, but each memory had changed. A simple smile now felt like the smirk of someone holding a secret. A late night conversation that had seemed intimate now rang with the hidden tone of guilt. Even the quiet moments, once thought to be born from comfort, now seemed like pauses in a performance, the brief intermissions between acts in a play designed to keep the audience blind. The sharpness of this new understanding cut through every layer of the past, slicing it open and revealing the rot that had been festering beneath the surface. Trust had been more than broken, it had been mocked. Every effort made to believe, to forgive small things, to brush aside nagging doubts. It all felt like a stage built for someone else's benefit, a place where betrayal could be dressed in the clothes of devotion and passed off as love. The body felt different in that moment, as though it understood before the mind could catch up. Muscles tightened, the chest grew heavy, a pulse that once quickened with affection now beat with something darker, colder. This wasn't heartbreak, not in the way people imagined it, with tears and desperate pleas for answers. This was something that felt like steel forming inside, something that no amount of apology or explanation could bend. Eyes no longer sought softness in his face. They searched instead for the cracks, the tells, the subtle shifts in expression that gave away the truth, and once looked for, they were everywhere, the way his eyes darted just slightly before answering a question. The faint stiffness in his smile when a certain name was mentioned, the moments when his touch lingered, but not in the way of a man in love, more like a man making sure the illusion stayed intact. The truth had a weight to it, heavy enough to press against the ribs, making each breath deliberate. It wasn't just about what had been done. It was about the insult of it all, the audacity to perform so convincingly, to wear devotion like a mask, while building an entirely separate life in the shadows. There was a cruelty in that kind of deception, a cruelty sharper than any open act of betrayal. The mind wandered to the nights spent believing in him, defending him, standing by him when others questioned. Every defense now felt like a betrayal of the self, as though each time he had been protected, it had only given him more time to perfect the act. The love once given so freely now felt stolen, misused, turned into fuel for the very lies that destroyed it. The sharpness didn't fade. If anything, it grew. It moved from the heart to the mind, shaping thoughts into something more deliberate, more controlled. This wasn't pain that would simply be endured until it dulled. This was the kind of wound that demanded action, the kind of revelation that didn't just close a chapter, but tore the entire book apart. Some betrayals leave the heart bruised. This one left it armed. It was the kind of night where the air itself seemed to press in, heavy and suffocating, as if the walls had grown ears and were straining to hear every whispered truth. The house was quiet, too quiet, and in that silence, the weight of what had been uncovered hung like a noose. The phone call still echoed in the mind, not the words themselves, but the tone, the hesitation, the slip that gave everything away. His voice, once a place of safety, now sounded like the hiss of a snake hiding in tall grass. Every shared memory played back like a reel in reverse, unraveling into a different picture. Every smile was now a smirk in disguise, every touch a distraction, every promise a transaction designed to keep the truth buried. There was no sudden outburst, no screaming, no shattered glass to mark the moment, just a stillness that felt more dangerous than rage. the tears they expected never came. Instead, something colder took root, a slow, deliberate heat that didn't consume in wild flames but smoldered deep, feeding on every lie, every betrayal, every moment of manipulation. That was the night a line was drawn, invisible but immovable, between what was and what would be. It wasn't only the affair, though the affair alone was a blade sharp enough to cut to the bone. It was the realization of how far the deceit stretched into bank accounts, family gatherings, private conversations, and even shared friendships. The betrayal was not just intimate, it was strategic. The people who had smiled across dinner tables, toasted anniversaries, and embraced in family photos had known. Some had even helped. Every single one of them was now a piece in a puzzle of betrayal, each connection a thread that could be pulled until the entire web collapsed. That night was no longer about heartbreak, it became about reckoning. Every move from that moment forward would be deliberate, every word chosen with precision, every gesture calculated to dismantle the world they thought they had secured. There was no interest in public outbursts or messy confrontations. This was a different kind of justice. The kind that arrived without warning, stripped away everything they valued, and left them with nothing but the echo of their own choices. The first step was silence, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of a storm gathering strength. Every day that passed without reaction only fed their illusion of safety, lulling them deeper into complacency. Friends were met with the same calm tone, the same practiced smiles. The husband, too, began to relax, mistaking quiet for forgiveness, mistaking the absence of confrontation for the absence of intent. But behind closed doors, the work had begun. Bank statements were studied until every discrepancy glowed like a wound. Conversations were revisited in memory, small details now carrying a weight that had been missed before. Private meetings with lawyers were scheduled under the guise of running errands. The life they thought they controlled was being mapped out piece by piece, and with each discovery, the path to their undoing grew clearer. The calm demeanor that greeted them each day became a weapon in itself. It allowed for the careful placement of seeds, casual remarks to certain people, subtle changes to routines, moments engineered to stir unease. They didn't know they were being played, that the board had shifted, and they were no longer the ones moving the pieces. The night that resolve was born, a different kind of power took hold, not the loud, desperate power of someone trying to cling to what was lost, but the steady, unshakable force of someone who had nothing left to fear. The goal was not just to expose them, it was to make them live inside the ruin they had created, to strip away every comfort, every illusion, until the only thing they had left was the truth they had tried to bury. When it came, it would not be in a single explosive moment. It would come in small losses at first, just enough to unsettle, then growing until the tide could not be stopped. Friends would turn away, money would vanish, reputations would crumble, and the home they once considered untouchable would no longer feel like a refuge. That night birthed the fire, and it would burn until there was nothing left but ash. If these words lit a fire in you, don't let it fade, ignite it. Like this video, subscribe, and join a community that refuses to settle for less than purpose, power, and truth.